Hey guys, my name's Angus, and today I wanted to do something a little bit different with my channel. This week is National Reconciliation Week here in Australia, so today I wanted to talk about some books by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander authors that I think should be on your radar this year. I know a lot of people aren't going to be interested in this at all, which is sad, but with everything going on across America right now, and not just that, everything that's happened in the past, the racism, abuse and murder of innocent black lives at the hands of police across the globe, I think it's well overdue that I use my platform and my privilege as a white person to amplify other people's voices, people that aren't often heard, people that don't have the same privilege that I do. I've seen so much excellent support and information circulating about black and POC authors, booktubers, creatives across all social medias, even here on YouTube. And I want to continue spreading that information on all my social medias. So there's a bunch of links in the description to places you can visit to educate yourself, places to donate, places to sign petitions, and a whole lot of information of how you personally can help. Being an Australian, it's sad to see that a lot of my Australian peers are forgetting that this happens here with our own Indigenous community. We are not exempt from this systemic racism. More than 400 Indigenous people have died in police custody in this country alone, and that's only since the 1991 Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. Systemic racism is a problem here, and it's well overdue that we acknowledge that, and not only acknowledge, but educate ourselves and fight it. As I said, it's National Reconciliation Week in Australia, which, if you're not aware, is a week that commemorates the anniversary of the 1967 referendum in regards to legislating separate and fairer laws for First Nation Australians. This week also aims to celebrate Aboriginal Australian culture and the sharing of cultures between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. This year's theme is In It Together, and I'll link some resources in the description if you would like to learn more about Reconciliation Week and what you can do to help. So today I thought it'd be really great to talk about some books written by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander authors that I think should be on your radar, especially if you're an Australian. I think it's well overdue that I use my platform and my privilege as a white person to help amplify the voices of Indigenous Australians. And I know that reading books isn't going to solve systemic racism here in this country and across the world, but it is a step towards educating yourself about the experiences of communities you might not yet understand. And I hope that by reading these stories, white Australians will grow to understand Indigenous culture here in this country and how important it is to preserve it, protect it, and celebrate it. So I've got 9 books to recommend to you today. They're a mix of fiction, non-fiction, there's some YA in here if that's what you're into. Also yesterday when I was at work, myself and my colleague put together a bigger list of recommendations on our store's website, and I'll link that in the description if you want to find out more. I've also linked lots of places where you can donate, you can sign petitions, learn how to support Black, POC and Indigenous lives, and educate yourself about everything, both about our First Nations community here in Australia and the injustices happening in America against the Black population and the systemic racism that exists all over the world. Go and have a look if you haven't already. For this video, all proceeds that I make, I will be personally matching and donating to the Healing Foundation, which is an Indigenous Australian non-for-profit organisation that aims to address the harmful legacy of colonisation, in particular the history of child removal that continues to affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. But without further ado, let's get into some recommendations. The first book I want to talk about today is The Yield by Tara Junewinch. The Yield is this year's winner of the New South Wales Premier's Literary Award. It was the book of the year, and it was also shortlisted for the Miles Franklin Award. Tara, the author of this book, actually grew up locally in the area that I live in. She's sometimes in the area. She also lives in France at the moment, which is really cool. When she's in the area, she's always been a great supporter of our bookstore. She's always coming in. She's a lovely woman, so generous and kind with her time and energy. She's such an intelligent person, and all of her books are fantastic. The word yield in English refers to the reaping, or what man can take from the land, but in Wiradjuri language, it refers to what we can give back. This is a beautifully written adult fiction novel about August Gondawindi, who is a young woman returning to her hometown of Massacre Plains after the death of her grandfather. On arrival, she learns that her grandfather was compiling a dictionary of the Wiradjuri language, but unfortunately it's gone missing. Also, on top of all of this, her widowed grandmother is being forced to pack up and move to make way for a mine development in their town. And this book really beautifully weaves all these 3 threads together with a mysterious letter from 1915, which I won't spoil. And it just all comes together to form a really beautiful story about people with a culture dispossessed, but even more a celebration of what was and what will always endure. The next book I want to talk about is Becoming Kira Lee Lewis by Jane Harrison. This is a YA novel about a young female Aboriginal law student in 1985 and her adopted white family. It's a really powerful story about an Aboriginal girl finding her own way back to her identity in quite a turbulent time in history. This is a really interesting read because it deals with a character who at first is really quite dismissive of her Aboriginal heritage, and we spend the novel following her as she finds her way back to her Indigenous roots. I also really love the cover of this book. I just think it's so striking and so eye-catching, and that's initially what drew me towards this book. The next book I want to talk about is Too Much Lip by Melissa Lukashenko. This is quite an unflinching and raw exploration of one modern-day Aboriginal family, and it's categorized as fiction, but it offers a really great insight into intergenerational trauma and abuse. The story follows Kelly Salter, who has spent her life avoiding two things: her hometown and jail. As the title suggests, Kerry has always been told her whole life that she has too much lip, she's too outspoken with her opinions and ideas, and she should just swallow her opinions. But now that her pop is dying and she's about to be locked up, she heads south back to her hometown on a stolen motorbike. Kerry plans to spend just one day over the border, but soon discovers that the Bundjalung country has a funny way of grabbing onto people. Old family wounds open up, a relationship develops, all the while the Salter family fights to stop the development of their local river. Although quite a serious read, this book has some really great moments of humor, honor and love, and sacrifice. Throughout the book, Lukashenko makes it abundantly clear her abhorrence of how her ancestors were treated and her rage at the systemic racism that exists throughout this really gripping exploration and confrontation of Australia. The next book I briefly want to mention is The Swan Book by Alexis Wright. What a stunning cover. I haven't read this book, but it is on my radar and I really want to get a copy. It recently came to my attention as an adult dystopian sci-fi that follows a mute woman named Oblivia. This is a book that deals with the future of climate change and the systemic racism that exists in this country, and I really do want to pick up this book. I am trying to find an affordable copy of this book because there's just really low stock levels of this book across the world, and there's this other alternative cover of this book that isn't as nice, that is a bit easy to find, but I really want to find a copy with this cover because it's beautiful. The next book I want to talk about is Fire Country by Victor Stephenson. This is a non-fiction look into the landscapes of Australia and the challenges we face with it. It's an account from an Indigenous land management expert, Victor Stephenson, on how the revisal of burning practices and improved reading of country can help restore our land. As Australia recovers from the trauma of our black summer of fires, many of us are looking to learn more about the threats of bushfire. It's clear to a lot of people that the current fire and forest management strategies are not working, and Victor Stephenson's Fire Country seeks to not only explore and explain Indigenous land management, but to prove how Indigenous cultural burning could be a superior method of land management. The next book I want to talk about is another non-fiction book, and it's Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe. Before I get into this one, I just want to start by saying that Bruce Pascoe has Boonwurrung, Tasmanian and Yuin heritage. There's been a lot of noise and argument from the white community here in Australia in recent years trying to discredit his indigeneity. I just think it's really telling that the people voicing these opinions are all white journalists. It's quite disgusting actually. Dark Emu has had quite a lot of noise in the Australian reading community, but if you don't know what it's about, this is pretty much a look into the history of Aboriginal behaviours before white invasion. In particular, it examines how there is evidence that Aboriginal people did build houses, they did sow crops, they did build dams and change the course of rivers. They displayed behaviours that were inconsistent with the hunter-gatherer tag that was placed upon them by these white settlers. And this opens up a world of questions about how different Aboriginal culture was than we were led to believe by history. Dark Emu draws on accounts from European explorers to argue that history has whitewashed the fact that Indigenous Australians had sophisticated agricultural practices prior to European settlement. Dark Emu has won a bunch of awards, as you can see on the cover, and Bruce Pascoe has a number of books that are really excellent resources if you want to learn more about Indigenous Australia, so I would highly recommend to go and check them out. Next up, I quickly want to talk about two poetry collections. The first is Black Work by Alison Whittaker. This is a mix of like memoir, fiction and reportage, and satire and critique in the form of prose. This is a really original and unapologetic collection that bravely unpacks some complex themes like colonization and Aboriginal rights in Australia. The second is actually a novel that's written in verse, and it's Ruby Moonlight by Abby Cobby Eckerman. Yeah, so this is a verse novel that centers around the impact of colonization in South Australia. Our main character Ruby is a refugee of a massacre. She's sheltering in the woods where she befriends an Irishman trapper, and this book deals with how fear of discovery is overcome by need for human contact, which in a tense series of events is forcibly challenged by an Aboriginal lawmaker. Alright, and the last book I want to talk about today is Top End Girl by Miranda Tapsell. This is a really thought-provoking memoir about Miranda's journey to creating the film Top End Wedding, which is quite possibly the first foray into an Indigenous romantic comedy here in this country. If you haven't seen Top End Wedding, please go give it a watch. It's a really hilarious and moving film about reconnecting with family and culture. And in this memoir, Miranda kind of holds a mirror up to Australian society and the culture we live in right now to show the prejudice that too often surfaces not only here, but across the globe. All right, that's all the recommendations I have for you today. There's so many more books to check out. Please check the links in the description to see the full list that I've created. And please, if you are an Australian and you want to learn more about the Australian Indigenous culture, educate yourself and start to understand what they've gone through, reading some of these books is a great place to start. These are all Own Voices stories. And to all my friends in America and across the world, if you're protesting, please stay safe. If you're white and you're protesting, please remember that your job is to support and protect. Please use your white privilege to help. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you found this video insightful. I hope you found some new books that you might want to check out. I'll see you soon. Bye.